Do you set a goal that's really, really important to you? It's something that you've tried and failed at many times and it's really important to you, and maybe it's a new year goal, maybe it's a goal for your birthday, maybe it's a goal for the summer, maybe it's a goal for that wedding, whatever it is. Do you set this goal only to get super close to it, and then in creeps your old friend, self-sabotage? And then you derail yourself, you start blaming yourself, and you start obsessing over why you're such a failure. Have you ever found that? Yeah, me too. And if you have, then this is perhaps the episode for you. Why you keep screwing yourself over and how to stop. This is the Johnny Lawrence podcast. I am, of course, Johnny Lawrence, and this is a podcast about being a human being, having emotions, and how we behave. That's what this is about. This is about the real life implementation of self-development, how it looks, how messy, unpredictable, non-linear, and absolute chaotic experience self-development is. I'm just going to be honest with you. You're like, Johnny, I'm not sure I want to do this anymore. Fair enough. I understand. But you see, today's episode is about, some of us might be really good friends with this, self-sabotage. Like I said at the beginning, there'll be situations in life where you have something really important to you. Maybe you want to pass your driving test. Maybe you want to lose weight. Maybe you want to get buff for the summer. Maybe you've decided you're going to start reading one book a month or listening to an Audible every month. Maybe you're going to get into a certain podcast. Maybe you're going to take a test. Maybe you're going to do a course, whatever it is. But yet, some reason, you keep sabotaging yourself. And then you keep collecting that sabotage experience as evidence that you're not good enough. So I want to make something clear right from the beginning. I understand what you're saying. I have experienced it and labeled it that too. However, you are not a self-saboteur. Self-sabotage doesn't exist. It's a myth. Well, I'm sure it does exist, but in this case, I don't think it is that. I don't want to believe, and I think maybe nor do you, that you sabotage yourself. But even if you do, how good's that? It's not somebody else, it's you. So it means you can do something about it. Because here's my theory, here's my idea on self-sabotage. I don't think you're trying to sabotage yourself. And I don't see how it's helpful for you to think that. You're not a saboteur. What you're actually trying to do is soothe yourself. You see, what you're endeavouring to do is practice and become good at a new set of behaviours. And the thing about humans is that we're always looking to really gravitate towards comfort and away from discomfort. And the way that we find comfort, by and large, is through familiarity. Our body's always trying to find a way to make something familiar so that we can make it a habit and we can forget about it and let it play in the background on autonomous. So actually, when you start to practice a new behaviour, whether it's good for you or not, it actually starts to become quite uncomfortable. And if you've got, say, a well-practiced habit like, I don't know, eating, maybe you comfort eat. Well, look at that. It's in the title, comfort eat. Maybe you comfort eat. And if you're really, really well-practiced at that, then that's going to be your only known way of seeking comfort. So actually, if you're on a diet and you're trying to get close to a certain goal weight or whatever, and you find yourself sabotaging yourself, I don't think it's that. I think it's that you actually are trying to soothe yourself because it all feels a bit overwhelming and uncomfortable, and you're trying to find a way back to it. So that's the premise really that I want to offer as part of this podcast to frame and contain the whole thing. That I want to help you understand that calling yourself a self-saboteur, believing that you're a saboteur, only really leans you into the idea that that saboteur is in you, that they are helpless and there's nothing you can do. And that actually, anytime you try to do anything that's good for you, you're waiting and creating this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy that the saboteur's coming. This feels like the right time for the saboteur to step in and ruin everything, you know? So let's have a look at that. So let's explore how self-sabotage is often a subconscious return to a familiar emotional state, even when it's destructive. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get back to something that's familiar. We're trying to get back to something that we recognize and that We know how it ends. It's a bit like watching, when you're not well and you put on your favourite film. It's because you know how it ends. There's no anxiety attached to it at all. You're not worrying that the bad guy's going to win or this person's going to die or this disaster's going to happen because you know how it ends. And this is the thing about self-saboteur or self-sabotage, is that you are going back to that old behaviour. You're going back to that familiar emotional behaviour. It doesn't matter whether it's good for you or not. It's familiar. And because it's familiar, it's offering you a level of comfort. And in that moment when you're feeling really overwhelmed, that comfort is everything. It's everything. And I think that's a kinder way to look at yourself. It gives you a kind of a bit more of a pass. Not are you looking for a pass, but I think it gives you a way of looking at it that's a bit more, that's what I'm trying to say, a bit more helpful, more than unhelpful. See, this is the thing. In self-development, we're always looking for what's helpful. We're not looking for what's unhelpful. We can analyze what's unhelpful as a way of staying away from it. But ultimately, we want to start adopting the habits that help us. We want to start casting a vote for the person we want to be, not the person we don't want to be. We want to start practicing the behavior we want to keep, not the behavior we don't want to keep. But first and foremost, we have to look at that with a bit of compassion and a little bit of empathy. No one's ever really created meaningful and positive change from a negative place. Like telling yourself that you hate yourself is not going to help you. It's really not. I promise you that. Because when it gets difficult and you need to dip into your bag of motivation, I hate myself as a motivator, is not going to help you. So I want to sort of talk about briefly how our brain has a preference for predictability and forming habits. And even if the habit that we have that we don't want is one that we don't want and we want to change it, it still feels safer because it's familiar. It's still familiar, more familiar than the healthy ones, because we know because our body and our mind and our brain knows what's going to happen when we do this. It doesn't know what's going to happen when we do that. So that becomes more of a risk. For example, this is how much your body creates habits. Think about if you're a driver and you drive a car. Now think about when you first drove a car and you got in and you had to adjust your seat and then you had to have the steering wheel and they were showing you how the steering wheel works and how all the pedals works, and then there was the gears, and then you had to watch this mirror and then you had to watch that mirror, and then there was all the road signs and signals and then things that you need to know about the highway code, blah, blah, blah. It's all so overwhelming, and it felt so overwhelming when we first did it. There were multiple times when I'm sure we thought, I can't do this, I don't want to do this, this is too hard, maybe I just buy a bike, whatever it is, But yet now, if you're a driver and you've been driving some time, you get in the car and you are so confident as a driver now that you can hold a conversation with the person next to you. You can sing along to a song. You can talk to your kids in the back. You can talk to your dogs in the back, whichever. Because your body has now, your brain has now automated? Yes, I think that's the word, automate. I was going to say automatize, but I didn't say autonomous. I'm going to give up on that thing. Or automate. Your brain has automated the whole process. So now you don't think about turning in the steering wheel. You don't think about changing gear. You don't think about all of the things that you have to do when you drive. Just imagine for a minute. Just imagine that you had to do that. That when you got into a car, that you had to think about absolutely every action you took. Like really think about it. I know we do in some way subconsciously think about it, but this is how clever our brains are. They want to make everything autonomous. They want to make everything automatic so we don't have to think about it. They want to make it into a habit. And that habit is formed through practice. So what we practice, we become really good at. So if we practice habits that aren't good for us, if we practice coping mechanisms that ain't good for us, if we practice things that aren't good for us in general, we will become very good at them. They will become familiar and they will become our behavior. And we will become comfortable with that, mistaking that for being good for us in some cases. So that's how much our brain wants to do it. It wants to keep us safe. It wants to make everything autonomous. It wants to make things easier. And that is its way of doing it. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's best for us and good for us. Another way to look at it, and it's probably the most helpful way for me and the things that I've struggled with in the past, is I look at self-sabotage behaviours as a coping mechanism. And the reason why I find that more helpful is because you can choose to find other ways other mechanisms to cope with things that you find difficult. But again, it comes back to that, what I always say about awareness. You have to become aware that you have a coping mechanism that isn't really serving you, that isn't really working for you, and actually is a bit detrimental to your physical and emotional health. So some of those behaviors can be destructive. One of mine was destructive. So as you're well aware, if you've watched The Slavery of Addiction, that my coping mechanism was to outsource my emotional regulation to alcohol. So I used to drink alcohol as a way of dealing with emotions, overwhelming emotions. Sometimes I used alcohol to connect with my emotions. Sometimes I used alcohol to escape my emotions. But nonetheless, I'm really sort of simplifying this, but it was my coping mechanism. It was my only known way of dealing with difficult and challenging emotions. And because I had had such a traumatic childhood, my gauge and measure for difficult and challenging emotions was all over the place. It was chaotic. So alcohol just sort of silenced things, and it worked for me. It worked for me. It did the trick until I realized that it was causing other damage in other areas of my life and decided that this coping mechanism wasn't the way. Now, had I have looked at it like, oh, alcohol is really bad for me and I need to stop drinking, then, and I did that for a long time, and I always ended up going back to it and sabotaging myself. And that was because I wasn't looking at it for what it was. Okay, what if I look at it now as a coping mechanism? Because if you look at it like that and then you take one coping mechanism away, it makes sense to introduce another one. And that's what I had to do. I had to abstain from alcohol, which was taking the coping mechanism away. And then I had to work on the reasons why I needed a coping mechanism. So the emotions that I was having and how to have those emotions and how to deal with those emotions. But then I also had to find other coping mechanisms for things that I found overwhelming and difficult. Because life's not going to stop throwing stuff at you just because you've decided that you're going to change your coping mechanism. It's going to keep doing it, and it did keep doing it. And I have found different methods and ways of coping, different ways of finding a way to connect with my emotions. And quite honestly, quite often, it's very simple, and it's just to sit with the emotion, to label the emotion, to recognize the emotion, acknowledge and validate, have the emotion. If it's, say, anger, I might go on the punch bag or something like that. But it's better for me to do that and all of those different situations, which are all different, than it is to lean back in towards the old and more destructive coping mechanism of drinking alcohol. So it's about replacing those behaviors with intentional self-soothing. So recognizing that you're not trying to sabotage yourself, you're trying to soothe yourself. So it's exploring, and I can't give you what they are. Obviously, I could say stuff like baths and exercise and all of those things, but you might not like those things. You might be a shower person and hate exercise. Therefore, it's not going to work because it has to be something you like and enjoy. This is not about punishing ourselves. It's not about punishing ourselves. When self-sabotage rears its head, it's trying to offer you comfort because you feel overwhelmed, because you feel like you're losing control, because things feel unfamiliar and therefore unsafe. So you have to start looking for these things, and it means you're going to try some stuff. And it means some of that stuff's not going to work. And actually the surprise there is sometimes you might decide that this thing, like, I don't know, ice baths, for example, that you absolutely hate it. There's no way I like ice baths. And then you might do it and actually quite enjoy it. A little bit of self-talk there, Johnny. Never done an ice bath. Not sure I want to, but that's another thing entirely. So it's about really understanding and finding these different ways of soothing yourself. Because we are emotional beings. We have emotions, and the emotions that we have are the way that our soul makes demands of us, tells us how we feel. They're not to be ignored. They're not to be ignored. And that self-sabotaging behavior wants to gravitate us away from discomfort and towards comfort. So we need to start acknowledging when we feel uncomfortable and we have the desire to soothe instead of the desire to sabotage. So we have to recognize that point where we are realizing that, hey, I'm feeling uncomfortable. This is all feeling unfamiliar. This is all feeling a little bit overwhelming. And I need to soothe myself. Not I need to sabotage myself so this all ends and we go back to previous behavior that's unwanted, and then we use all that as a way of saying, oh, I'm not good enough and I'm a failure and I always do this. No, none of that. None of that. Very familiar story, very easy to handle because it's happened before. It's familiar, but we don't want that anymore. We have to start casting a vote for the person we want to become. We have to start casting a vote for the person we want to become. And that's okay. And it will take practice. And part of that practice will involve failure. There'll be days that it doesn't go very well, or it doesn't happen at all. But that's okay, because we get to analyze that and we get to look at that and say, what happened? Because quite often there would have been an emotional trigger, somebody or some situation or some place. Maybe it's at work, maybe it's driving, whatever it is. But at least then you've got a specific place to look at and to start to find ways of coping and different mechanisms to look into. But I suppose the most simplistic way of understanding this all is that you have to practice the behavior you want to keep, but that is going to require two things. Patience. It took a long time for you to build these destructive behaviors and these self-sabotaging behaviors. It's going to take you a long time to undo them and to build new ones. And also self-compassion. As I said at the beginning, labeling yourself as a failure, labeling yourself as a saboteur. I mean, just think about that. If somebody sabotages somebody, that's not a very nice thing to do. So why would you do it to yourself? And if you believe that you did it to yourself, would you like that? Would you like the person that did that? No. So it's also playing into your self-worth as well, and your self-confidence and your self-belief and your self-respect and your self-trust. It's building into all those things too. That's not helpful. So you have to realize that you have to be patient, and you're going to make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to fail sometimes. And that's okay. Because really, the only time you truly fail is when you completely give up on yourself and you stop trying. If you fail one day and then you wake up the next day and decide to give it another go, that's brilliant. That's exactly the stuff we're looking for. And then we have to have that self-compassion. Stop telling yourself that you're a saboteur. Stop it. Stop. It's not helpful. It's not helpful. It's not going to get you where you want to go. So let's stop. Let's practice. Stop saying to ourselves that we're a saboteur, that we're this, that we're that, and start being a bit more compassionate to ourselves and start being on our own side. One of the examples that I remember when I was a PT a very, very long time ago, and one of the questions I used to ask people was what's motivating them to want to lose weight? And they would say, I hate myself. So that would be the first thing I would step in and say, look, that's your motivation. If you hate yourself, that's not going to be the best motivator for you when it gets really tough, when people start tempting you to go back towards the old behaviors, or you want to go back to the old behaviors. It's going to be very difficult to defend against that. But here's a really good example. So say somebody is really overweight, and they've been overweight for a really long time, and they've lived with that, and they've become familiar with that, and they know how to manage all of that. They've got clothing that fits them for the way they are. They've got their seat in their car adjusted to the right place so that they feel comfortable in their car. And every walk and area of their life they've become comfortable in as that weight. But yet they hate themselves. They look in the mirror and they hate the way their clothes look. They hate the way they feel. They hate all of that. So they decide to start losing weight. And then they start losing weight. And then their clothes stop fitting. They have to go out and buy new clothes, and they don't know how they feel about that because they're trying on clothes and actually they quite like the way that looks now. And then they've got people complimenting them and telling them how great they look, and that feels really, really uncomfortable, and they don't like that at all. Their food has changed. The things that they're eating is different. They're sleeping differently. They're drinking more water and less fizzy drinks or whatever it is that they've changed. They've made all of these changes in their life, and nothing is familiar. And they're just feeling hugely uncomfortable. And they don't know what to do with that feeling, because in changing all of those things, they've not recognized that it's making them uncomfortable, and they've taken away that comfort eating, and they've not put anything else in its place. So really at that point, it's only a matter of time before they go back to that old behavior. They don't have any choice because they've not given themselves any options. So what could they do differently? Well, they could recognize that at some point in this journey, no matter how good it is that they're losing weight and they're starting to get compliments and they're starting to wear new clothes and they're starting to feel good about themselves, that at some point, even though all of that's going on and that's what they wanted and that's what they intended, that it's going to make them feel uncomfortable, and that they're going to have this overwhelming urge to seek comfort and to move away from the discomfort that they're experiencing. And the only way they know how to do that is the chocolate, is the cake, is the crisps, is the popcorn, is the McDonald's, whatever it is. And that's what they do. And then they use that as evidence that they're not good enough and they need to stop trying and that they're just this way and that's who they are. That's the power of self-sabotage. That's the power of believing in self-sabotage. So let's not believe in self-sabotage. Let's believe in self-soothing, and let's give ourselves more options. Let's give ourselves different options. Let's give ourselves more helpful options, impactful options, options that work us towards the person we want to become, not the person we don't want to become, options that help us practice the behavior that we want to keep, not the behavior that we don't want to keep. Let's start doing that, because we're the only ones that can. There will be lots of people out there that can support us, that can encourage us, that can be with us on this journey, but they cannot do it for us. We have to take that accountability, and we have to stop telling ourselves that we're a saboteur. So just to recap, I think I've made it pretty obvious. I think I've hammered it home. You are not a saboteur, and stop believing that you are. You're just well practiced at the only known way of soothing yourself, and that is that sabotaging behavior. It's a coping mechanism, and it's a good idea to ask yourself, what other coping mechanisms can I employ? Ones that work towards my goal and not away from it. And you have to be patient when you're creating new behaviors. The same level of patience that you did with the ones that you didn't want in the end. So hopefully that's been helpful. Hopefully you've enjoyed this podcast, and you will come back next week and listen to my rants. I feel like this is therapy for me. Therapy over. So thank you so much for listening. If you want to follow me on social media, you can find me at the Self-Development Coach. You can find the podcast at the Johnny Lawrence Podcast on Instagram. As you know, I want to get out there and speak to more crowds, to more audiences, and help as many people as I can with their self-development and their emotional translation. And I'm planning to do that through going to people's workplaces, the charities, clubs, festivals, events, whatever you can throw at me. Go over to johnnylawrence.co.uk, get in contact through the email, and let's have a chat about whether I can come along and inspire and motivate your company, your crowd. There's lots more coming in the year, lots more things that I've got in the pipeline that I can't really talk about yet, but I'm excited about the idea of delivering it, and I can't wait to share it with you. And I'll obviously do that on this platform as well as social media. And then, as always, as I've mentioned somewhere in this podcast, The Slavery of Addiction, the documentary that is on YouTube. You can find it on YouTube. I'll put the link in the bio. I think it's a really good way for you to get to know me, to get to know why I am the way I am and the experiences I've had, and that I have sort of failed my way to some level of success, I suppose. But as always, I deeply, deeply appreciate you. This is a podcast about being a human being. It's not about being perfect. It's about being a human being. It's the podcast about being a human being, about our emotions and the behaviors and the mistakes and the failures, and how we can learn from it all, and how we can stop judging ourselves and judging each other and just start being better human beings for ourselves. And that doesn't mean being perfect. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next week.